Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon stands as one of these great impenetrable novels. You've got Infinite Jest, you've got Ulysses, you've got Gravity's Rainbow, you've got Finnegan's Wake, Moby Dick. All of these novels are renowned for their complexity, for their encyclopedic nature, for their experimental nature. But I want us to look in more detail at some of the unique devices that Thomas Pynchon uses in Gravity's Rainbow, kind of the quintessential postmodernist novel, particularly the postmodernist American novel, in order to understand some of the political commentary that is hidden within Gravity's Rainbow. Now, it's no secret that Gravity's Rainbow is a political work. Oftentimes you're trying to figure out exactly what that political nature is, but from the fact that we're taking place in terms of setting and time in the last months of World War II, and our main characters are mostly on the Allied side, there is a sense of trying to get inside the mindset of those being bombarded by the Nazis' V1 and V2 rockets. These were mainly used as fear tactic weapons, which didn't actually have in and of themselves much destructive capacity. Their force came from the fact that they, especially with the V2, they were sort of unprecedented in their ability to inspire paranoia. And in Gravity's Rainbow, paranoia becomes one of the central themes, and Pynchon adds into this paranoiac atmosphere some much needed comedy. And comedy is something that we can see running throughout, all of literature, but I think it's especially prominent in kind of late modernism and postmodernism. And it serves as a way to bridge, especially for Pynchon, the high and the low. So literature for a while was very focused on delivering an idealized high depiction of society. You only have the fortunate or well-off represented in literature. Only rarely, for example, would you get accurate depictions, if at all, of female characters. If they were depicted, it was in a way that served those voices that were in power. And we can see that Pynchon in this novel tries to bridge from that gap of the high to the low as well. This means diving into toilets. This means entertaining sex scenes, and very weird sex scenes sometimes. This means entertaining the themes that actually figure fairly prominently in the lives of most people, but may go unrecognized if they aren't treated with some sort of creative gesture in literature. And by using comedy, Pynchon is able to link the obscene with the sort of profound realizations of the magnitude of destruction that we see in World War II, the likes of the V1 and V2 rockets. And I want to look at a few passages that help to link sex and the death impulse of the V2 rocket, help to understand why is it that these are linked in Gravity's Rainbow. Because, of course, one of the main plot points in Gravity's Rainbow is that arguably our main character, Tyrone Slothrop, has this unique, almost psychic penis, which sort of heralds the coming of a V2 rocket within a few days by him first having an erection or sexual encounter somewhere, and then afterwards, it is as if the V2 rockets are programmed or told to go and follow after Slothrop's erections. And there's an undercurrent throughout of Pavlovian conditioning. Pavlov was one of these behavioralist psychologists which envisioned the idea of classical conditioning and really made it prominent by testing for it. This was the idea that you could condition a response just by the body becoming acclimated to some sort of behavior and expecting a result. And this is often done with dogs. Dogs are sort of the quintessential Pavlovian animal. And Pavlov did this very famous experiment where he would ring a bell for a dog, and after ringing that bell would deliver food to the dog. And the dog would start to anticipate the coming of the food and would salivate whenever this bell would be rang, because it would be accompanied by food shortly after. And when Pavlov removed the food, the conditioned response of salivation remained. So a behavior had been classically conditioned through the repetitive usage of some stimulus. And one of the strange things that's happening in Gravity's Rainbow is the reversal of stimulus and response. Rather than Slothrop's erections being triggered as some sort of excitatory response to the stimulus of the V2 rocket explosion, it is as if the destructive aspect of the V2 rocket is the conditioned response to Slothrop's erections as the stimulus. And of course, it's important to note that Pynchon is not necessarily trying to give us some sort of like universal account of, oh, well, actually cause and effect are always flipped the other way around. We just think there's cause and effect. There's definitely some commentary on cause and effect, but it's not quite as reductive as, oh, everything is just reversed. I think it's more apt to say that Pynchon is vying for an ontology of synchronicity, of an interconnectedness of the universe which leads to the inability to eliminate a conditioned response or stimulus completely, as well as their reciprocal relationship with one another. And for example, there's almost a sort of paranoid undercurrent, a sort of propitious moment that occurs when Slothrop gets an erection. And we can see it in the case of his sexual encounter with a woman named Darlene. When, with no warning, the room is full of noon, blinding, white, every hair flowing up from her nape, clear as day, as the concussion drives in on them, rattling the building to its poor bones, beating in the window shade, gone all to white and black lattice of mourning cards. Overhead, catching up, the rocket's rush comes swelling, elevated, expressed down, away into ringing silence. Outside, glass has been breaking, long, dissonant cymbals up the street. The floor has twitched like a shaken carpet, and the bed with it. Slothrop's penis has sprung erect, aching. To Darlene, suddenly awake, heart pounding very fast, palms and fingers in fierce pain, this hard-on has seemed reasonably part of the white light, the loud blast. By the time the explosion has died to red, strong flickering on the shade, she's begun to wonder about the two together. But they're fucking now, and what does it matter? But God's sake, why shouldn't this stupid blitz be good for something? And who's that, through the crack in the orange shade, breathing carefully, watching? And where, keepers of maps, specialists of surveillance, would you say the next one will fall? So right, we almost have like a cliffhanger sort of ending there of, oh, well, where do you think it's going to fall? Find out next time on, and this happens to be the end of this particular episode, which is interesting to note the cinematic parallel that Pynchon tries to make with the episodic structure of this piece. But we can see just a few lines down There's a woman who came twice before cock was ever officially put inside cunt. And this is important to both of them, though neither has figured out why exactly. So, right, there's a reversal of stimulus and response, which defies our traditional notions of causality, because Pynchon is trying to bridge the high of our technological feats, of these tremendous technologies that have been created to volley warheads from place to place to inflict damage, to the low of that destruction that's involved, and also the low, quote unquote, of sex and of obscenity. And in this propitious moment, right, there's a sort of blinding white that fills everything, and the rocket's rush comes swelling, elevated, expressed down. This is very similar imagery to an erection. And this ringing silence is the sort of ever-present paradox in the relationship between Slothrop's erections and the blasts of the V2. There's a sort of confounding silence here of the universe just not giving us a straightforward response. And this is very much in line with the feelings of discontentment, of confusion, of disgust at humanity's capabilities in World War II, for its ability to inflict such harm on itself for seemingly no reason. It's as if the response comes out of nowhere, as if it has been conditioned by some sort of implicit death drive. And the notes of Pavlovian conditioning run throughout this when, for example, we get an interesting little section in which the normal goings-on of Slothrop are actually mixed with the traditional imagery of this perversity of the Pavlovian dog, right, which is subject to all sorts of testing. One morning, he had not seen her for about a fortnight. He woke in his hermit's cell at the White Visitation with a hard-on, scratchy eyelids and a long pale brown hair tangled in his mouth. It wasn't one of his own hairs. It wasn't anybody's he could think of but Jessica's. But it couldn't be. He hadn't seen her. He sniffled a couple of times, then sneezed. Morning developed out the window. His right canine ached. He unreeled the long hair beaded with saliva, tooth tartar, mouth breathers, morning fur, and stared at it. How'd it get here? Eerie, dearie. And there's lots of subtle little hints that I think paragraphs like this really showcase the brilliance of Pynchon, because we have, of course, the theme of the hard-on. This is kind of the surface level of what's going on. But we have mentions of hair, of sniffling, of the canine tooth specifically, right? Canine being another name for a dog. Also the mentioning of saliva. This was a common part of Pavlovian dogs, which would be taken as data. And also morning fur. So, right, all of these subtle little moments come together to actually give us good reason to think that the Pavlovian dog is being referenced here in the erection of Slothrop, linking his role as a sort of instrumentalized part of an experiment. And, this experiment takes on dramatic tones, the likes the paranoid would be thinking about, and also the likes of which the average citizen during World War II would feel themselves to be, of being part of this great experiment of imperialist powers, of mighty nations battling with each other. And what's the outcome? Well, it's this impending death impulse, which people have to cope with through comedy. And hence Pynchon's usage of very dark comedy, of irony, is it's a way to cope with the actual facts of what's going on, but highlight the absurdity of things in a way that makes them bearable. Later in part 2, there's the sexual encounter between Slothrop and Katya, and we get a similar image of, again, this link between sex and the destructive impulses of the V2 rocket. She has sunk to the deep bed, pulling him along into down, satin, seraphic, and floral embroidery, turning immediately to take his erection into her stretched fork, into a single vibration on which the night is tuning. As they fuck, she quakes, body strobing miles beneath him in cream and night blue, all sound suppressed, eyes in crescents behind the golden lashes, jet earrings, long, octahedral, flying without a sound, beating against her cheeks, black sleet, his face above her unmoved, full of careful technique. Is it for her? Or wired into the Slothropian run together they briefed her on? She will move him. She will not be mounted by a plastic shell. Her breathing has grown more hoarse, over a threshold into sound. Thinking she might be close to coming, he reaches a hand into her hair, tries to still her head, needing to see her face. This is suddenly a struggle, vicious and real. She will not surrender her face. And out of nowhere, she does begin to come, and so does Slothrop. For some reason now, she who never laughs has become the top surface of a deep rising balloon of laughter. Later, as she's about to go to sleep, she will also whisper, laughing, laughing again. So there's a lot of very interesting things to note here, and this paradox that I mentioned earlier is returning with this idea of the single vibration on which the night is tuning, right? This is the mystery stimulus that we get, the sort of mystery connection, but it's not really made that explicit. It's almost a sort of like Kabbalistic, mystic kind of truth going on here. But it's important to note the allusions to or doubling of the V2 rocket. One of the famous aspects of the V2 rocket is that it would fly into the sky and it would reach an apex and then it would fall down, and as it fell down, it would break the sound barrier. And as such, it was famous for not being able to be heard until you either died before you could hear it, or you heard it hit somewhere else, in which case, as Pynchon says, it's someone else's problem now. And we can see here that in the sexual encounter, all sound was suppressed, right? Flying without a sound. So there's that link there. We also have jet earrings, right? Jet is very similar to a rocket. Also the idea of black sleet, which may be a reference to the contrails of the V2, of the remnants it would leave behind. Also the idea of a shell, which is an important part of the construction of the rocket. And then, of course, one of the infuriating parts of the V2 is that you never really seem to be able to understand the method of the V2. One of the profound issues in Gravity's Rainbow is that many of the characters are realizing that the rockets fall into a Poisson distribution. There's no apparent rhyme or reason necessarily to why rockets are hitting certain spots. And that's part of it, the ambiguity of not surrendering its face, right? Of not revealing too much, of keeping the cards hidden. And as such, what is the only response? Laughing, laughing again. So comedy becomes the after effect. Death becomes punctuated by comedy and irony in a way that allows the paranoia to become livable and the reality outside of the paranoia to become livable. And Pynchon is going to blur the lines between the two, between reality and paranoia. Because, right, many of the sort of collaborations between various intelligence agencies during World War II, they very much do resemble a sort of paranoid scheme of all sorts of informers and agents, and you never know if someone's wired or whatnot. So it's not necessarily as if reality is paranoia-free. One of my favorite aspects of Foucault in Madness and Civilization is to show that, in fact, what makes us real is the presence of madness in us. And those who would wish to make madness a forlorn aspect, a past aspect, that we're beyond madness, is the most mad act possible. Now, there's a passage here that actually serves as a good gateway into understanding the hidden truth of the irony of the V2 rocket. It itself blends the high and low, of course, as I mentioned earlier, the height of the human spirit to achieve these technological means in a relatively short span of time. But, of course, also linking that with the low of the destructive capabilities that not only did it possess, but that it heralded and allowed to come forward with the nuclear bomb. We have all sorts of chemical weapons we've developed today. But there is a sort of moment of destruction which Pynchon wants to show is inseparable from creation. And that even in something like the sexual act, or indeed, as he's going to show in the passage I'm about to read, the political assassination, there is a truth which goes beyond the purely creative or affirmative. It is destructive and nihilistic and absurd, in a sense, as well. And we can't separate these two. They operate in synchronicity. The moment of assassination is the moment when power and the ignorance of power come together, with death as validator. When one speaks to the other, then it is not to pass the time of day with et tu Brutus. What passes is a truth so terrible that history, at best a conspiracy, not always among gentlemen to defraud, will never admit it. The truth will be repressed, or in ages of particular elegance, be disguised as something else. And this truth of history is the synchronicity of the high and the low. And this becomes manifest in the age of the almost ironic elegance of war through the V2 rocket. History itself becomes a conspiracy, a paranoid reality. And I think it's interesting to wonder, does this have to do with the violation and destruction inherent in the sexual encounter? Sexual encounters can be both affirmative and exciting, but they can also, they are literally a violation of each other's body. They can be a destruction of the idea of virginity, right, of purity. And I think the hidden aspect that Pynchon is trying to showcase here is the unique individuality of each moment, which is synchronistically, just like as the case with the V2, an act of creation and destruction, as in the creation of great weapons and the destruction of the species. When thinking about the aspect of classical conditioning, thinking about this Slothropian problem, right, of what is the relationship between Slothrop's erections and the destruction of the V2? Is it some sort of causality? Is there some sort of mysterious stimulus? Is it just happenstance? Is there some sort of external factors which Slothrop's body is somehow attuned to, some sort of change in air pressure which comes just before the launching of a V2 due to changes in market tensions, all this different little tiny stuff that, according to the butterfly effect, could sort of, sparkle and expand into some sort of causal relationship. Pointsman says, there is to this enterprise, Pointsman knows, a danger of seduction because of the symmetry. He's been led before, down the garden path of symmetry in certain test results. in assuming that a mechanism must imply its mirror image, irradiation, for example, and reciprocal induction. And who'd ever said that either had to exist? Perhaps it will be so this time, too. But how it haunts him, the symmetry of these two secret weapons, outside, out in the blitz, the sounds of V1 and V2, one the reverse of the other. Pavlov showed how mirror images inside could be confused, ideas of the opposite. But what new pathology lies outside now? What sickness to events, to history itself, can create symmetrical opposites like these robot weapons? Sign and symptoms. Was Spectra right? Could outside and inside be part of the same field? And this is essentially the theory of synchronicity. That history itself is a sort of cosmic contradiction of opposites that come together in these historical moments, in these events that get written down in great literature. For example, the V1 is this rocket-powered drone, which makes, it was nicknamed the buzz bomb, and it made this extremely loud sound that is just very distinctive. And it would stop for a second right before you were about to be hit. There was about a 10-second kind of pause as it flew down, as the propulsion system turned off and it dove down. Whereas the V2 is sort of the opposite of this noisy buzz bomb. It is the silent killer. So within the German war effort, within the weapons technologies of the Nazis, is this paradox itself, the synchronicity of the buzz bomb and the silent killer. And there's this inside versus outside, which can be thought of as, the inside is the logic of causality, of I tickle the universe here and I get a laugh here, which is ironically a quote from Deepak Chopra, but I mean it in a different way than he does, surely. But then the outside is the unknown, and it's the unknown which pushes back, which refuses to solely be accountable to an affirmative moment of creation or an absurd nihilistic act of destruction. So this becomes manifest with technologies like the V2, where we cannot escape the cataclysmic effects, the risk inherent in every technology, which acts as, in Paul Virilio's theory, the accident is the sort of vitality inherent in every technology that resists being totalized, that resists being accounted for systematically. And as such, Pynchon gives us some very interesting insights into framing this time period, framing what it's like to be an individual in such a situation, and also understanding how all this links to ideas of causality, of the link between the high and the low, of the necessity for comedy. Because at times, this novel just devolves into sort of like Broadway kind of almost slapstick moments of singing and dancing. And, I think of the moment with Grigory the octopus and being thrown the crab for, Slothrop to save Katya in part 2, which is just like classic slapstick humor. This novel is able to encapsulate all of these ideas in a way that these great novels tend to do. Like Ulysses, like Infinite Jest, like Finnegan's Wake, and here Gravity's Rainbow. They're able to give us these profound insights in an encyclopedic way that takes count of stylistic inventiveness, of the history of the English language, and thus alluding to numerous other things, And in so doing, it gives us a sober and detailed look into a time that is past, but that we can reify in our analysis, in our deep and careful understanding of the historical situation. So that being said, I hope this has helped make use of Gravity's Rainbow, make sense of Gravity's Rainbow, because it is not an easy work to understand, but I think this is one of the most important themes, and there are tons of others, but this is one that kind of remains a mystery throughout the novel. Check out any of my other lectures I've done on postmodernism, German idealism, gender theory, postcolonial studies, and other literature. Become a channel member for $5 a month and gain access to, among other things, a private monthly philosophy Zoom, which you can tailor to your needs. Maybe you need help reading some passage from, Deleuze, Foucault, Joyce, maybe even Pynchon. Maybe you need help talking about some philosophy problem, whatever you need. I also have super thanks available if you just want to donate to the channel. It'd be greatly appreciated because books are not cheap. That being said, that's it for this lecture, and I'll see you in another one.